As the sun begins to set, the group's leader invites Light and his companions to camp with them for the night. It is not only dangerous to travel after dark, he explains, but Mia is also eager to discuss magic with Light. Seeing no real drawback, Light agrees. Later, as everyone gathers around a small campfire to share a meal, Mia begins bombarding Light with questions about his past. Unable to reveal his true identity or long-term goals, he improvises and claims that both his parents were exceptional mages. According to him, that upbringing explains why he can cast spells without the need for incantations. The explanation satisfies Mia, but her brother remains unconvinced, unsure why that detail is so impressive. In response, Mia launches into an enthusiastic explanation of just how extraordinary Light's magic truly is. She outlines the three primary classifications of magic. First is combat class magic, typically used against individual enemies. Second is tactical class magic, which affects a wide area like the firewall Light cast earlier. Finally, there is strategic class magic, capable of influencing events on a massive, even global scale. Such spells can trigger earthquakes or summon meteor strikes, and usually require multiple elite mages to pool their mana and chant in unison just to attempt them. Although other races often wield powerful magic more easily, it is extremely rare for humans to reach such heights. That is why Mia had been so stunned to witness Light cast high-level magic so effortlessly. While her brother does not fully understand the mechanics, he can tell from her explanation that Light operates on an entirely different level. Still, he reminds Mia that she deserves recognition as well, since her abilities have already earned her a formal recommendation to the Principality of Nine Magic Academy. This detail piques Light's interest. He asks whether they mean the academy overseen by the Principality of Nine, the governing body representing the 9 major races. Mia confirms that they do. Gold adds that being acknowledged by the Principality is a remarkable achievement, clearly marking her as a highly talented mage. Her brother agrees, but explains that their circumstances have made things difficult. Both of their parents died during a plague, leaving them unable to afford the academy's tuition. As a result, they formed an adventuring party with their childhood friends, Gimra and Wordy, simply to survive. Their current goal is to earn enough through dungeon expeditions to eventually send Mia to the academy. Mia insists she is already happy traveling with the people she cares about and does not want them to take extreme risks for her sake. Her brother promises he will not act recklessly. Watching their exchange stirs memories within Light, particularly the time he spent with his own younger sister. Soon after, Mia and her brother ask what inspired him to become an adventurer. Maintaining his cover story, Light claims his parents died in a fire that left him severely burned, prompting him to search for a rare potion capable of healing his injuries. The tragic tale leaves the group momentarily silent. Sensing the growing awkwardness, Gimra abruptly changes the subject by asking whether Gold and Nemumu are a couple. Nemumu immediately bristles and snaps that she would never date someone like Gold under any circumstances. Gold, remaining perfectly composed, replies that he has no interest in someone as immature as her. Their usual bickering soon resumes, easing the tension. Elsewhere in the dungeon, Kito continues slaughtering orcs to collect biological samples for Yanok's research, an attempt to bypass the level caps imposed on each race. Now that they have gathered sufficient magical material, Yanok remarks that all they need is a human test subject. Kito already knows exactly who he intends to use. Sometime later, Light visits the guild to exchange a fresh batch of magic stones. A crowd quickly gathers, amazed by the sheer quantity he has collected. Ever since his party defeated the Quad Scythe Mantis, their reputation has soared. People have even begun referring to them as Black Medley. Receptionists who once ignored them now treat them with clear respect. Light is quietly pleased, since gaining recognition was part of his strategy from the start.
As he and his companions head back toward the dungeon, a man suddenly calls out to him. Nemamu instantly becomes alert, but the stranger quickly assures them he means no harm. He introduces himself as Suvelin, accompanied by his teammate Gilbert. They explain they have heard that Light's party not only defeated the Mantis, but also reached the dungeon's 5th floor. When they spotted him passing by, they felt compelled to greet him. Moments later, the rest of their party arrives, reminding them it is time to enter the dungeon. After saying their farewells, they head inside. Watching them leave, Light reflects that it is encouraging to see his achievements inspiring hope among other humans in the city. Not everyone shares that sentiment, however. Many individuals from other races are openly envious of his rapid rise and believe his accomplishments must be fraudulent. Light had anticipated such reactions. If they refuse to acknowledge his achievements willingly, he decided, he will simply produce results so overwhelming that they cannot deny the truth. Upon entering the dungeon, he informs Gold and Nemamu that he plans to return to the 5th floor that day. Before descending, he notices the same group of children from earlier and decides to greet them. Mia and the others are surprised but delighted to see him again. Her brother remarks that the timing is perfect because Mia has been wanting to give Light something. Although shy at first, Mia eventually presents him with a small clamshell container filled with ointment she crafted herself. Remembering his story about severe burns, she hopes it will ease his pain. Light is deeply moved by her kindness, though he feels a twinge of guilt for deceiving her. Wanting to reciprocate, he gives her one of his own items, a beautiful bracelet. Mia hesitates, unsure whether she should accept something that appears so valuable. Light reassures her that her gift meant a great deal to him and that he wishes her to keep the bracelet as a token of his gratitude. She beams with joy and promises to treasure it forever. After they depart, Nemamu quietly asks whether he is truly comfortable giving away such a rare item. The bracelet is an S-class relic capable of granting a small miracle, depending on the wearer's intent. Light replies that it seemed like the perfect gift for someone like Mia. Soon afterward, they arrive on the 5th floor, which is completely blanketed in snow. The environment works in their favor, as the thick snow provides excellent concealment. Light assigns Gold and Nemamu the task of hunting Yetis, while he activates a teleportation item that instantly returns him to his throne room in the dungeon city. There, he relaxes with a cup of warm tea and checks in on the progress of his revenge campaign. Ellie reports that preparations are nearly complete and that they will soon be ready to advance to the next phase. Pleased with the update, Light grants her full authority to use whatever resources she needs. He then instructs Mia to continue overseeing operations in the Abyss and orders Yuki to remain focused on scouting the ancient forest. Nazuna eagerly asks whether there is anything he would like her to handle. Unsure how to respond, since her greatest strength lies in combat rather than strategy, Light ultimately tells her to remain on standby and protect the city in case of a dangerous attack. That alone fills her with pride, and she vows that no enemy will slip past her watch. Light smiles quietly to himself, anticipating the moment his plans finally come to fruition. More than anything, he longs to see the look of utter despair on Sasha's face when he confronts her. Meanwhile, deeper within the dungeon, Gilbert and Suvelin have set up camp and are taking turns keeping watch while their companions rest. At one point, Suvelin steps into the woods to relieve himself. When he returns, however, he is confronted by a horrifying sight. Gilbert's severed head was discovered lying on the ground, with Quito standing calmly over the corpse. Their two companions, who had been asleep moments earlier, had already been silently executed. Quito made it clear that the slaughter was not personal, but driven by his deep-rooted hatred for the human race.
Realizing he was hopelessly outmatched, he instead threw down a smoke bomb and fled, determined to escape and warn the guild. He felt confident in his chances, believing that most magic was ineffective without a clear line of sight. However, just as he thought he had succeeded, something struck him hard in the back.
Through the lingering haze, he saw Kaito effortlessly gliding toward him on a magical hoverboard. Moments later, Yanak knocked him unconscious and scolded Kaito for killing all the humans, despite being explicitly told they were needed alive. Kaito dismissed the criticism, arguing that eliminating a few worthless humans should not matter, especially since Yanak had never shown concern for them. Yanak, however, pointed out that time was running out and viable test subjects were becoming scarce. His research remained unstable, and Suvalin would likely die from side effects long before the formula was perfected. Sometime later on the surface, Nemumu was seen in a tense exchange with a guild receptionist as she pushed for Light's promotion. Although the receptionist acknowledged Light's strength, she reminded her that the guild had already bent the rules once by advancing him from F rank to D rank in a short period. Not enough time had passed to justify another exception. Still, she added that if Light accomplished something truly extraordinary again, the guild would have no choice but to promote him. Determined to make that happen, Light later came across a posted notice about an unknown killer targeting adventurers. He reasoned that capturing or defeating this murderer would certainly qualify as a major achievement and resolved to track him down. The challenge, however, was that he had no leads to follow. Gold suggested using his gacha-based ability to draw a card that might help locate the killer. But Light explained that the cards were completely random, making the odds of obtaining a useful tracking ability extremely low. Nemumu then proposed returning to the Abyss to recruit someone more skilled in tracking. While Light admitted it was a sensible idea, he rejected it on the grounds that the journey would take too long. Since the killer appeared to be targeting humans specifically, he refused to waste any time while lives were at risk. At that moment, the three suddenly sensed a spatial distortion forming within the room. Instantly dropping into formation, they prepared for combat. Instead of an enemy, however, Light was shocked to see Mia tumble out of the portal, unconscious. He rushed forward to catch her, only to watch the miracle bracelet he had given her snap in half. Unsure of what she had endured, but certain it had been horrific, he gently carried her to a bed. As she muttered fragmented warnings in her sleep, he cast a healing spell to accelerate her recovery. When she remained too weak to speak, he reluctantly apologized and prepared to read her mind. Using a high-level spell, he plunged into her memories. He witnessed Mia and her companions encountering another group of human adventurers who urgently warned them about a killer roaming the dungeon and targeting humans exclusively. Although the children had previously dismissed the rumors as the work of a wild beast, they now realized no ordinary monster would single out humans. Uneasy but determined, both parties decided to leave the dungeon as quickly as possible. However, exhausted from their earlier battles and unprepared for such a sudden retreat, Mia's group struggled to push forward as night fell. It was then that Yanak's voice echoed through the darkness, cautioning them about the dangers of wandering so late. Unaware that they were speaking to the very killers they feared, Mia suggested warning them about the murders as well. Yanak and Kaito thanked them politely, briefly convincing the group they were fellow adventurers. That illusion shattered when Yanak casually complained that he should have cleaned up after his last ambush more thoroughly, since the rumors were making human adventurers avoid the dungeon. Realization struck the group like a blow, leaving them frozen in terror as they understood they were face to face with the murderers. Kaito, meanwhile, seemed to relish their fear.
Recognizing that escape was unlikely for all of them, the three boys drew their weapons and ordered Mia to run, prepared to hold the enemies off with everything they had. Kaito was visibly offended that mere humans believed they could challenge him. When Mia's brother charged forward, Kaito casually slashed his chest without hesitation. He dealt similarly devastating blows to the other two boys. Though not yet dead, their injuries were so severe they could barely remain standing. Even so, they forced themselves upright and shouted at Mia to flee, launching one final desperate attack. Their persistence only angered Kaito further. He decided to end the fight, but Yanok objected, pointing out that the boys could still serve as valuable test subjects. Kaito retorted that anyone who dared defy him deserved death, adding that Yanok could still conduct experiments if even one or two survived. Yanok conceded that a magician like Mia would indeed be especially useful, but maintained that the boys also had value. Kaito reluctantly promised not to kill any more potential subjects. Before Yanok could begin examining Mia, however, Kaito made it clear he intended to satisfy his own twisted urges. Yanok refused to participate and turned away in disgust, merely reminding him not to kill the girl. Terrified, Mia trembled as Kaito approached, until her brother miraculously staggered to his feet and screamed at her to run. Yanok was astonished that the boy remained alive with such grievous wounds, and ordered Kaito to capture him alive at all costs. The boy's body was failing, yet he focused solely on buying Mia time. With Kaito briefly distracted, she seized a chance and fled. When Kaito moved to pursue her, he was intercepted by Elio's desperate attack. Though Elio stood no chance of victory, the maneuver stalled Kaito long enough to grant Mia a few extra seconds. As he swayed on the brink of collapse, Elio recalled advice he had once received from Gold. The true combat depended not just on strength, but on creativity and surprise. Acting on that lesson, he hurled his sword as a feint, then charged in and slammed his shield into Kaito's jaw. The blow sent Kaito crashing to the ground. Though it was all Elio had left, he felt a flicker of pride at landing a clean hit. Enraged and humiliated, Kaito ignored Yanok's command and retaliated by driving a spear of light through Elio's stomach. Refusing to grant him a quick death, he intended to prolong the boy's suffering. Yanok intervened, warning that if Mia escaped and spread word of their crimes, their entire operation would be exposed. Reluctantly acknowledging the danger, Kaito abandoned his torment and pursued Mia. She ran with all her strength, heart pounding, until the dungeon's exit finally came into view. Suddenly, 3 glowing swords materialized before her, blocking the path. Kaito had caught up, wielding Grandius, a legendary blade once belonging to the Elven Queen, capable of spawning endless blades of light. Declaring escape impossible, he urged her to surrender. Mia refused. Chanting a quick spell, she launched a spray of icicles to obscure his vision before fleeing into the forest. Though she managed to gain some distance, Kaito soon caught up again and knocked her to the ground. Sneering, he told her she should feel honored to be sacrificed for the rise of a future legendary hero. Mia defiantly replied that he did not deserve such a title. A true hero, she argued, possessed compassion as well as strength, like light. Kaito, in contrast, was nothing more than a coward who preyed on the weak. Her words reopened old wounds, reminding him of the ridicule he had endured from other elves who had branded him a bully unworthy of respect. Consumed by fury, he forgot Yanok's instructions and raised his weapon to kill her. Facing certain death, Mia desperately searched for any way to reach light. At that moment, the bracelet finally activated. Back in the present, after witnessing these memories, Light was overcome with rage. Without hesitation, he ordered Gold and Nemumu to prepare themselves, declaring his intent to bring ruin upon the elves responsible.
Meanwhile, deep within the dungeon, Yanok struggled to heal Elio, but soon realized the damage was beyond repair. Frustrated at losing such a promising subject, he was interrupted by Kaito's return. When Yanok demanded to know whether Mia had been captured, Kaito admitted he had lost her. Yanok panicked, unable to comprehend how a human girl had outmaneuvered him. Kaito snapped back that he could not have anticipated her sudden disappearance. Yanok reluctantly concluded that she must have used teleportation magic or an item, which meant their situation was now dire. If Mia reported the incident to the guild, news would inevitably reach the elven nation. Worse still, once it became known that Kaito had stolen the sword Grandius, the elves would dispatch their strongest forces.
The head knight alone was rumored to be around level 3,000, accompanied by a personal guard no weaker than level 2,000. In other words, if they did nothing, both Kaito and Yanok would be doomed. Their only hope now lay in perfecting Yanok's experiments and making Kaito powerful enough to stand against the elite knights of the Elven realm. As they were preparing to leave, Light suddenly appeared before them and calmly informed them that they were not going anywhere. Kaito immediately recognized him as the same man who had once confronted him for cutting in line when he first entered the dungeon. What unsettled him far more, however, was the realization that a human had managed to approach him without being sensed, despite his level being as high as 1,500. Light's expression darkened the moment he noticed Gimra and Wordy lying motionless on the ground. Realizing he had arrived too late to save them, he gently closed their eyes and whispered a quiet apology for not coming sooner. At the same time, Gold rushed to Elio's side and lifted him carefully. Sensing a faint pulse, she realized there was still hope. Light quickly focused his mana and channeled a healing spell into Elio before turning toward Kido and initially demanding an explanation. He immediately corrected himself, however, deciding that their motives no longer mattered. In his view, the moment they caused his friends to suffer, they had already sealed their fate. He swore that they would experience agony so overwhelming that they would beg for death to come sooner. He then instructed Nemumu and Gold to stand back, making it clear that he intended to handle the situation alone. Kaito, meanwhile, felt deeply insulted that a low-tier human would dare to challenge him in single combat. Tired of being mocked and defied by those he considered inferior, he vowed to savor every moment of tearing Light apart. However, when Kaito launched his first attack, Light stopped it effortlessly with his staff. To his own surprise, he found himself slightly underwhelmed, as he had expected far more resistance. He then drove his staff forward with force, nearly knocking Kaito unconscious. Enraged, Kaito unleashed the full power of his sword, sending wave after wave of radiant blades toward Light. Even as dozens of glowing weapons flew through the air, some slicing through parts of his cloak, Light responded calmly with a burst of ice magic, freezing and deflecting every attack with ease. Kaito's face twisted in disbelief, and he began raging like a child unable to comprehend how a mere human could outperform him. He started ranting that such a thing should have been impossible, especially with the ancient sword of a Maestro in his possession. Light had not been paying close attention until the mention of the Maestro caught his interest. Realizing this was the clue he had been searching for, he pressed Kaito for more information. Laughing, Kaito revealed that he knew about the Maestros because he himself carried the bloodline of Astro. Upon hearing this, Light immediately informed Nemumu and Gold that their mission had changed. While he had originally intended to kill Kaito on the spot, he now planned to drag him into the abyss and extract every piece of information from his mind. Understanding his intent, Nemumu and Gold declared they would deal with Yanok while Light handled Kaito.
Yanok protested that it was unfair for them all to gang up on him, especially since he was not built for combat. Nevertheless, he revealed that he had prepared for such a situation. Gesturing toward two motionless figures standing in the shadows, he caused them to shift grotesquely, their bodies mutating into horrifying hybrids, the result of his twisted experiments that fused humans and monsters together. He proudly explained that he had sought to break through the natural limits of the human body, though stabilizing such creations required an enormous number of human test subjects. For that reason, he intended to continue collecting more whenever the opportunity arose. Gold, Nemumu, and Light were horrified by his confession. Matters grew even worse when Light recognized one of the hybrids as a man he had once met in town, someone he now regretted failing to protect. Realizing the man could no longer be saved, Light quietly asked Nemumu and Gold to end his suffering. They immediately cut the hybrids down, hoping to grant them peace.
Yanok merely smirked and revealed that the creatures had been engineered to regenerate from any damage. As the hybrids repeatedly restored themselves, Nemumu and Gold continued fighting, growing increasingly frustrated, not only by Yanok's taunts, but also by the thought of leaving those poor souls trapped in endless agony. Deciding to end the ordeal, they unleashed their ultimate techniques, channeling immense mana into their weapons and striking with full force. This time, Yanok's confidence faltered. The hybrids did not rise again. Panic spread across his face as he stared at the lifeless remains of what he had once considered the pinnacle of his research. While he stood frozen in shock, Nemumu calmly approached him from behind and struck him sharply, silencing his protests. Meanwhile, Light continued to dominate Kaito with relentless magical assaults. Each near miss caused Kaito's expression to twist in panic, a sight Light found almost amusing given how arrogant his opponent had been moments earlier. Refusing to be humiliated by a human, Kaito activated the Holy Sword's final form, layering multiple enchantments onto the blade and greatly extending its range. Light acknowledged that the weapon was indeed remarkably versatile. Yet, despite its impressive display, Kaito's attacks failed to land a single meaningful blow. Frustrated, Kaito accused Light of cowardice for constantly evading him and insisted that he would already be dead if he had stood still. Light decided to humor him. Planting his feet firmly, he told Kaito to strike with everything he had. Seizing the opportunity, Kaito leapt high into the air and brought the sword down with full force. Although the attack connected, it barely left a scratch. Stunned, Kaito could not comprehend how an ordinary human could withstand a direct blow from Grandius. Light calmly invited him to continue attacking, if that would help him understand the vast gap between them. Kaito responded with a frenzied barrage of strikes, yet none of them affected Light in the slightest. Eventually, losing interest, Light shattered the sword's enchantments with a flick of his staff, drove a punch into Kaito's abdomen, and sent him flying with a clean strike to the face. When Kaito finally came to a stop, battered and bloodied, Light approached him with a cold expression. He stated that he had many questions and would not kill him yet, not until he experienced even a fraction of the suffering he had inflicted on others. Realizing he had no chance of escape, Kaito dropped to his knees and begged for mercy. He admitted he was from the Elven nation and once had been destined to become the next commander of the White Knights. In exchange for his life, he promised to reveal everything he knew. The sight of such desperation disgusted Light. He reflected that true heroes fought until their final breath, just as Elio, Gimra, and Wordy had done when they stood against Kaito and Yanok to protect Mia, despite knowing they were outmatched. Turning back to the fallen bodies of Gimra and Wordy, he quietly apologized once more and vowed to do everything in his power to ensure Elio survived.
Declaring it time to return to the abyss, Light prepared to depart. When Kaito nervously asked what would become of him, Light bluntly informed him that both he and Yanok were coming along. He was not finished with them until they had answered every question he had. Moments later, Light activated a teleportation spell, and when the two criminals opened their eyes again, they found themselves in a completely unfamiliar place. Yanok demanded to know where they were. Light calmly replied that they were now in the deepest layer of the Abyss dungeon, the very place he called home. Unable to comprehend why anyone would choose to live in such a brutal environment, both Yanok and Kaito stared at him in disbelief. Their reaction only provoked Nemumu, who struck Yanok down for implying that Light would lie. The commotion soon drew the others, who gathered eagerly to greet Light. Upon seeing the prisoners, they questioned why he had brought such individuals with him. Light explained that the two were notorious criminals responsible for horrific experiments that had claimed countless innocent lives, including those of his close friends. However,
He added that they possessed vital knowledge about the true nature of the Maestros, which is why he had postponed their execution. Hearing of their crimes, the girls' expressions darkened, and they began listing the punishments they believed the criminals deserved. Anticipating such reactions, Light firmly ordered them to restrain themselves until all useful information had been extracted. Though reluctant, they agreed to honor his decision. With matters temporarily settled, Light asked Gold to oversee Elio's recovery and instructed Nemumu to accompany him so they could give Gimra and Wordy the funeral they deserved. Just as he was about to leave, Yanok fell to his knees and begged for mercy, insisting that everything had been Kaito's idea. Kaito immediately retaliated with accusations of his own, claiming he had only participated because Yanok had promised to help him surpass his physical limits. Their argument continued until Light silenced them with a single question. When they had slaughtered and tortured innocent people while pretending to be divine beings, had they ever spared anyone who begged for mercy? Both men fell silent, fully aware that they had shown none. That silence told Light all he needed to know. He calmly declared that they would receive the same treatment they had given others, and that nothing they said would change that. Sometime later, Mia awoke in an inn in Dagus, and Light seated quietly beside her bed. Confused, she asked what had happened. Light explained that he and the others had reached her just in time and brought her back to safety. He reassured her that Elio had survived his injuries. However, when she nervously asked about Gimra and Wordy, Light gently handed her locks of their hair and revealed that they had succumbed to their wounds before he could save them. Overcome with grief, Mia broke down in tears, but still thanked Light sincerely for saving her and her brother. Respecting her need for space, Light rose to leave, though he could not shake a lingering sense of guilt. Moments like this forced him to question whether pursuing revenge with his power was truly the right path. The following day, Light visited the Adventurers Guild to report the incident and provide all relevant details. However, he deliberately omitted the fact that he had personally taken Kaito and Yanok with him, leaving the guild to believe that the two criminals were still at large. Although the guild still believed that Kaito and Yanok were somewhere at large, Light chose not to correct that assumption. In recognition of the information he had provided and for saving two potential victims, the guild granted him and his team an official promotion to C rank. Afterward, Light sat down with Mia and Elio to discuss their future plans. When he asked what they intended to do next, Elio explained that they had decided to retire from adventuring and return to their hometown. Light was somewhat surprised and suggested that they could likely join another party. Elio agreed that it was possible, but admitted that moving on so soon after losing Gimra and Wordy did not feel right. They also wished to bring their fallen companions home so they could be laid to rest properly among friends.
Respecting their decision, Light then turned to Mia and asked about her magic studies, the very reason she had become an adventurer in the first place. She replied that she planned to continue teaching herself for now and would work hard so that the next time she met Light, she would no longer be a beginner. Once Mia and Elio departed, Light decided to return to the Abyss to check on the situation there. Upon his arrival, he was greeted by May and Ellie. When he requested an update, May handed him a file summarizing everything they had extracted from interrogating Kaito and Yanok. According to the information, descendants of a Maestro were said to level up far more quickly than ordinary people. There was also an ancient legend claiming that if a Maestro was not stopped, they could eventually bring about the end of the world. This revelation made Light wonder just how powerful such an individual would have to be to possess the potential to destroy the world single-handedly. Unfortunately, the intelligence they had gathered was limited. Most of it stemmed from a conversation Kaito had once had with the captain of the White Knights several years earlier. Even after Ellie used forbidden magic to extract memories, many were fragmented or incomplete, leaving them with only scattered pieces of the truth. Light then asked about the current condition of Kido and Yanok. Ellie opened a portal to show him, revealing the two prisoners in a miserable state after prolonged interrogation. Concluding that there was nothing more to learn from them, Light decided it was time to dispose of them permanently. He summoned a creature known as Dead Man's Banquet, which devoured both men in a gruesome manner. With that matter settled, Light turned to Ellie and asked about the progress of her other preparations. She reported cheerfully that everything was in place and that he could begin his revenge against Sasha whenever he wished. However, she suggested capturing the White Knights first, since each of them was rumored to possess Maestro blood, and their abilities were largely unknown. She also pointed out that their vice-captain, Mikhail, was Sasha's fiancé, making him an ideal hostage. Light was genuinely impressed by how thoroughly she had planned their strategy. Meanwhile, in the Elven nation, Sasha was enthusiastically recounting to Mikhail how she had betrayed Light and forced him to beg for his life. Mikhail appeared to enjoy the story immensely, even remarking that he wished he had witnessed it himself. He went on to describe a past mission in which he had helped wipe out a human village, and admitted that he had taken pleasure in hearing the victims plead for mercy. The two laughed together, bonding over their shared cruelty, completely unaware that Light was already preparing to repay every pain Sasha had inflicted on him. Later, while traveling across the Elven continent in her carriage, Sasha reflected happily on her meeting with Mikhail, feeling fortunate to have found such a perfect fiancé. Her maid watched her with pride, already imagining wedding preparations. Although Sasha reminded her that the ceremony was still far off, the maid insisted that it was never too early to begin planning. Their conversation was abruptly interrupted when the carriage came to a sudden halt after a frail human dropped a heavy load of crates in their path. The elf who owned him began whipping the man furiously, ordering him to move faster. Observing the scene with disdain, Sasha muttered that humans were utterly useless. At that very moment, Light stepped briefly into a shadowed alley. Sasha's heart nearly stopped when she recognized him. Shocked, she leapt from the carriage and rushed after him, convinced her eyes were deceiving her. She chased through narrow back streets, but eventually reached a dead end with no sign of him. Concluding that she must have imagined everything, she sighed in relief, only to notice a message he had left behind, instructing her to meet him at the Great Tower. The realization overwhelmed her, and she screamed in panic. Her maid hurried to her side as Sasha collapsed in fear, convinced that this development could destroy everything she had gained from her mission to eliminate Light. From a nearby rooftop, Light watched the chaos unfold and quietly told Ellie that it was time to proceed with the next phase of their plan. Ellie, thrilled by the prospect of revenge, began to imagine how brutally she would punish Sasha for harming her master. Together, they departed to set the final act of their plan into motion.
Elsewhere, at the Elven barracks, two soldiers named Nia and Kia amused themselves by throwing knives at a bound and beaten human. Nearby, an elf named Sharphat openly groped his human slave, while his fellow soldiers and even their captain looked on with visible disgust. Sharphat casually mentioned that Kido had gone on a murderous rampage before being defeated by a human, and that higher command now demanded vengeance. He dismissed the order, claiming that Kido had been a traitor who abandoned his comrades. Another elf insisted that avenging a fallen ally was still their duty. As Nia and Kia continued tormenting their victim, Sharphat told them to finish him off. They refused, declaring they would play with their toy as they pleased, and mocked Sharphat for his shameless behavior. Behind them, an elf named Muste commented calmly that killing a human should be seen as an act of mercy, even an honor. Sharphat scoffed at his seriousness, but Muste replied that knowing when to act with purpose was what distinguished them from beasts. Suddenly, the captain silenced everyone with a single command, his overwhelming aura forcing obedience.
He ordered Nia and Kia to stop their games and instructed Sharp Hat to kill the prisoner, which he did without hesitation. The captain then told the soldiers to dispose of the body and prepare for their next assignment. Off to the side, Sosha stood frozen, tears streaming down her face as she watched yet another human die. Sharp Hat told her gently to return to her quarters and rest, and she fled immediately. Turning back to Sharp Hat, the captain warned him against fraternizing with humans, reminding him that elven bloodlines were considered sacred. Bearing children with lower races was viewed as disgraceful, and elves traditionally married into Maestro lineages to preserve their strength. Sharp Hat responded dismissively, arguing that their people had stopped growing stronger despite their supposedly elite heritage. The captain countered that this decline was precisely the result of generations of diluted bloodlines. Dropping his pretense, Sharp Hat admitted he had never intended to have children with slaves and simply enjoyed manipulating and humiliating them. As Nia and Kia dragged away the corpse, they called him a twisted degenerate. Bored, Sharp Hat even suggested eliminating Sosha as well, though the captain refused, stating that their priority was avenging Keto and restoring the Elven Queen's honor. Later that night, Sasha was awakened by a strange disturbance. In the distance, a glowing magic circle formed, summoning a massive tower in the heart of the forest. At the very top of the structure, Ellie appeared and waited silently for Sasha to arrive. Staring out from her window, Sasha wondered if this was the place Light had meant in his message. Meanwhile, deep within the forest, a group of elves escorting human slaves was ambushed by a savage Orthos. Panicking, the elf in charge abandoned the children to face the beast alone. By morning, rumors of monsters swarming the forest had spread throughout nearby settlements, and authorities began posting bounties for information about the mysterious tower. When Light noticed one of these posters, he was struck by how many elves were volunteering to confront the threat. Not far away, two arrogant elven adventurers began flirting with Nemumu, boasting about their level and urging her to abandon her companions. She silenced them with a cold glare, clearly unimpressed. Light stepped in calmly and told them to back off. Offended, the two attacked Light, only to be instantly subdued by a silent thunderbolt. Realizing they were facing the infamous Black Mage, the surrounding crowd quickly retreated in fear. As Light and his group continued through the streets, he silently hoped that Aoyuki was managing the situation on her end. In the forest, a chained human girl guiding another group of elves collapsed from exhaustion. Her master threatened to beat her, forcing her to stand. Moments later, a massive Orthos crushed his skull before slaughtering the rest of the group. When the creature finally approached the girl, she braced for death, but it merely sniffed her and retreated into the trees.
Soon afterward, a band of rough-looking men appeared. Expecting the worst, she was shocked when they instead treated her wounds with healing potions and offered her food, clothes, and a walking stick. Their leader reported the rescue to Aoyuki, who was stationed at the top of the towering structure. Ellie later asked whether managing so many monsters across the forest was becoming too much for her. Aoyuki replied casually that she was handling it. Ellie remained unconvinced, worrying that one mistake could cost innocent lives. She also began questioning whether they were meant to serve merely as Light's obedient puppets, carrying out his orders without hesitation or doubt. Aoyuki confirmed without hesitation that absolute loyalty to their master was indeed their foremost duty, insisting that nothing should ever come before it. Ellie, however, challenged her stance, remarking that Aoyuki was behaving like a mindless pet. The comment struck a nerve, and Aoyuki snapped, threatening to kill Ellie for speaking disrespectfully about their master. Ellie remained unfazed and calmly questioned whether Aoyuki truly believed she could defeat her in a fight. Aoyuki replied that she was willing to find out, and the tension between them quickly intensified. Just as the two seemed on the verge of a bloody confrontation, the returning thugs called out to Aoyuki, announcing that they had arrived back at base. Their interruption forced both women to compose themselves. At the base, the group handed the rescued girl over to an elderly caretaker responsible for looking after the survivors. Once she was safely settled in the foster shelter, the girl quietly thanked the thugs, who encouraged her to remain strong. Observing how carefully Aoyuki tended to each rescued human, Ellie finally felt reassured that she could indeed be trusted to guard the forest alone. That night, Sasha stood by her window, deeply anxious about confronting Light. The monsters now swarming the forest were far too dangerous for her to handle alone, and she knew the White Knights would soon begin investigating the situation. Such scrutiny would expose her failure to eliminate him. Feeling cornered, she concluded that she had only one option left. She would go to the tower herself and complete the mission, no matter the cost. By the next morning, the elven aristocracy had gathered for a formal council to address the matter of the mysterious tower. During the discussion, the Chancellor recommended sending the White Knights to investigate, but Captain Hardy immediately dismissed the suggestion, claiming that his elite forces were not needed for something so trivial. The nobles observed their disagreement in silence, as only the Queen possessed the authority to settle the dispute. At last, the Queen voiced her decision, siding with Hardy and declaring that his proposal made the most sense. Instead, she ordered that the bounty be increased to attract more adventurers to investigate the forest. With her verdict delivered, the nobles quietly dispersed, though the Chancellor lingered behind, visibly irritated that Hardy had prevailed. Afterward, Hardy met privately with his mother and thanked her for sparing her soldiers from being sent on a scouting mission. She responded affectionately, assuring him that she would never risk her precious son on such a low-priority task. Hardy vented his frustration about the Chancellor, accusing him of playing political games in the midst of a crisis. The Queen merely laughed, amused by his irritation. However, Hardy insisted that the matter was no joke, claiming that the Chancellor's true objective was to dismantle the monarchy itself. She remained confident, assuring him that as long as he stood guard, the Chancellor would not succeed. Her tone then grew serious as she warned Hardy that the tower posed a far greater threat than any political rival. She suggested that it might even possess the power to wipe out their entire kingdom, leaving him stunned. Hardy wondered aloud whether this signaled the rise of another Dark Lord. The Queen admitted that such a possibility could not be ruled out, though she believed that if all races united their strength, they might still be able to stop such a figure. Nevertheless, she noted that the emergence of a Dark Lord often coincided with the rise of a hero from the human world, an outcome she considered equally dangerous. Frustrated, she remarked that eliminating humanity altogether might have prevented such risks. Hardy countered that doing so would only make the elves appear as villains.
Still, he reflected that if humans ever produced someone as powerful as a Maestro, the elves would have no choice but to either befriend or destroy them to ensure their own safety. The mention of a Maestro stirred an old memory of a human named Light, who had once been rumored to be one. The Queen quickly dismissed the thought, stating that the man had long ago been eliminated for his weakness. Yet as Hardy left the chamber, a cold conviction lingered in his mind. He believed that humanity deserved extinction for all the chaos it had brought upon his people. Meanwhile, in the elven city, Light and his companions noticed the two adventurers from earlier glaring at them from a distance, prompting the group to wonder whether another confrontation was imminent. Moments later, Sasha caught sight of Light and immediately called out to him. Nemu and Gold instinctively prepared for battle, but Light signaled them to stand down. Sasha stepped forward and demanded that he remove his mask. Light replied that it merely concealed old burn scars, but she remained unconvinced and suddenly knocked the mask from his face. Although he felt the urge to retaliate, Light restrained himself, deciding that true revenge would be far more satisfying if delayed until the perfect moment.
Nemu, enraged by Sasha's smug attitude, attempted to lunge at her, but Light stopped her before the situation escalated. He then pulled back his hood, revealing a face marred by severe burn scars. Sasha recoiled in shock, clearly unsettled, and realized that this was not the man she had been searching for. Without another word, she turned and walked away. Once she was gone, Light allowed himself a moment of quiet satisfaction, knowing that his illusion had worked perfectly and that letting the confrontation continue would have been a dangerous gamble. He thanked Gold and Nemu for holding themselves back. Gold complained about Sasha's unbearable attitude, and Light agreed, recalling how deeply he had once been deceived by her twisted lies. Refocusing on their objective, he reminded the group to stay on mission before leading them deeper into the forest. As the trio dashed through the trees, the two elven adventurers reappeared and pursued them relentlessly. Despite Light's warnings, they refused to back off. Eventually, the group reached a dense, secluded part of the forest where Light had intended to rendezvous with his subordinates. Since no one had arrived yet, he decided to wait. What surprised him most was that the elves had somehow managed to keep pace with them. Acting as though they had cornered him, the elves refused to let Light escape. He responded with a faint smirk, even complimenting their nerve. Nemu remarked that it was a shame such talent was wasted on bullying others instead of being put to better use. The elves sneered in response, claiming it was a divine privilege for any human to die at the hands of their sacred race. Growing tired of their arrogance, Light casually called for Mira to deal with them. Unable to sense anyone else nearby, the elves assumed he was bluffing and mocked him, saying he was only acting cocky because his party had gained some fame. At that moment, a chilling presence manifested behind them as a sinister woman materialized out of nowhere. Mira informed the stunned elves that they had signed their own death warrants by disrespecting her master. Her arms twisted into grotesque, flesh-ripping jaws that clamped down on the elves and devoured them alive in a flash of gore. When the slaughter was over, Light apologized for making her handle such a gruesome task. Mira simply shrugged, replying that even if elves tasted unpleasant, she was always happy to serve him. Gold admitted that her power was impressive, but also deeply terrifying. To his surprise, Nemu agreed. Mira offered them a faint smile and reassured them that there was no need to fear her, as they were allies now.
Soon afterward, 3 more of Light's followers arrived, led by the poised Maid Ice Heat, with Suzu and Jack close behind, fully prepared for whatever challenges awaited in the forest. Light thanked them for their timely arrival. Ice Heat then instructed Suzu to take the lead. When Suzu responded only with a soft nod, Ice Heat scolded her for failing to show proper respect. Concerned that they might have offended their master, Suzu's companion, Locke, quickly apologized on her behalf, explaining her naturally quiet disposition. Light dismissed the matter, stating that he did not mind her silence. Before long, the group resumed their journey. Gold took a moment to thank Jack for joining them. Jack grinned and remarked that it was simply bro code, admitting that he could not abandon a friend. Although he credited Ellie for sending him, he insisted there was no way he would ever leave Light behind. However, the moment he casually used a familiar nickname for their master, the girls shot him disapproving looks. Caught off guard, Jack asked whether they were truly upset about something so trivial. Light remained silent as Jack shrugged and insisted they were overthinking the matter. In his view, they were all partners, and treating Light like an untouchable king would only make him lonelier. Even Gold began to sweat as he watched Jack push everyone's patience. Finally, Light intervened and told him to tone it down, reminding the others that Jack had special permission to speak informally and that there was no need to take offense. They all nodded without protest, yet the tension within the group only seemed to grow heavier as they continued forward.
Light soon glanced toward Ice Heat and noticed something different about her appearance. She had abandoned the usual maid uniform she wore in the abyss and replaced it with practical combat gear. Curious about the sudden change, he questioned her decision. Ice Heat explained that she had been undergoing rigorous training while fulfilling her duties and believed that since they were now operating on the surface, where battles were inevitable, proper battle attire was the wiser choice. Mara laughed at her explanation and teasingly suggested that she should remove the homemade outfit altogether if it was only going to slow her down. The remark struck a nerve, and Ice Heat snapped back, telling Mara to stop joking around in front of everyone as though their situation were not serious. As the two began to argue, Light found himself oddly relieved. The gloomy tension that had been weighing on the group finally seemed to lift. At the same time, Jack leaned toward Gold and casually asked whether he had been slacking off in his absence. Gold simply shook his head as usual. He then shifted his attention to Suzu and explained to the others that she was extremely shy and tended to communicate more freely through her must-eat companion, Locke. Turning to Nemamu, he suddenly asked whether Suzu was technically a girl. Caught off guard, Nemamu nodded, though Light clarified that her identification card had listed her as androgynous. He concluded that they would have to look into what that truly meant at a later time. Meanwhile, back at the tower, Ellie waited anxiously beside Aoyuki. As soon as Light and his group arrived, Nazuna and the other two girls rushed forward to welcome him with visible excitement. Wasting no time, Ellie guided everyone inside the enormous structure, revealing a sleek and expansive interior. She explained that every room had been fitted with advanced technology she had reverse-engineered from the abyss's core, ensuring that the tower was completely secure from any external threat. As they moved deeper inside, they were greeted by the sight of a massive dragon. Ellie casually reassured them that there was nothing to worry about, explaining that the creature was simply her pet. At her suggestion, the entire group made their way upstairs. Upon reaching the summit, Light ascended the steps and seated himself upon his throne. Ellie offered to review the plan once more to ensure everyone remained aligned. She explained that their objective was to celebrate Sasha's upcoming marriage before delivering the long-awaited retribution she deserved. Although Light's original strategy effective, she admitted to making several adjustments to heighten the impact.
According to her revised plan, the Elven White Knights, the Queendom's strongest warriors, would first be forced into battle against the group's own elite fighters and publicly humiliated. Afterward, they would be captured, effectively crippling the elves' military strength. This would allow Light's faction to extract crucial intelligence regarding the Maestro and eventually information about the remaining 9 races. Ellie emphasized that the massive tower had been constructed not merely for dramatic effect, but as a fully functional fortress that would serve as their command base. She then summoned a shadow clone of Light, explaining that it would allow the Black Clown Mask squad to continue leveling independently, while the real Light remained behind to observe and direct events. Impressed by the thoroughness of her preparations, Light praised Ellie for her efforts. She informed him that Aoyuki was already deep within the forest, using her beasts to lure Sasha toward the tower. Surrounded by terrifying monsters, Sasha was visibly shaken, but continued pressing forward. She believed that confronting Light was the only way she would ever find peace. Back inside the tower, Light found himself wondering how events would unfold once she finally arrived. Ellie responded with a confident grin, remarking that her dragon would be ready to give their visitors a proper welcome. Outside, the sight of the enormous beast filled Sasha with fear, forcing her to retreat and observe the tower from a distance through a camera feed. Ellie assured Light that it was only a matter of time before Sasha returned, and that she would undoubtedly bring the White Knights with her. She promised to orchestrate the perfect clash between their forces and the elves, calling it a showdown worthy of Light himself. Soon afterward, in the Elven Queendom, Sasha convened an emergency meeting with the nobles.
She reported that swarms of giant beasts had begun circling a mysterious tower, causing other monsters to scatter across the forest's outer regions. She also revealed that a terrifying dragon now stood guard over the structure. Her claims initially stunned the room into silence, but many nobles quickly dismissed them as implausible. They insisted that creatures of such strength could not simply appear without warning. Sasha firmly maintained that everything she had said was true. At that moment, the Chancellor intervened, reminding the Assembly that a similar report had recently been received from the Black Clown Mask. With two separate sources now issuing identical warnings, he openly criticized Hardy for refusing to deploy the White Knights and instead relying on others to handle the crisis. After a brief silence, Hardy calmly announced that he would personally lead the White Knights to confront the dragon threat head-on. Following his departure, Sasha approached the Chancellor and asked whether she could accompany the knights to the tower. He informed her that this had always been the intention and that her participation was in fact a reward for bringing the situation to their attention. However, he warned that she would need to bring one of the powerful artifacts stored in her father's vault if she wished to be of any real assistance in battle. Later that night, Sasha visited her father to request his blessing to use the artifact. By the following morning, Hardy had assembled the entire White Knight unit and outlined their mission strategy. He explained that Sasha would serve as their guide. Sharp Hat questioned whether she would be able to keep up, but Sasha confidently assured them she could manage. Mikhail stepped forward and added that he would personally protect her if the situation became dangerous. At that moment, the twins, Nia and Kia, mentioned that Sasha had been ordered to accompany them directly by the Chancellor and was carrying a rare heirloom from her family. While they assumed this special treatment was due to Mikhail's close ties with the Chancellor, Sharp Hat appeared irritated, clearly frustrated that political considerations were interfering with a military operation. Back at the tower, Ellie projected the scene using her magic so that Light could observe. Curious about Sasha's condition, he asked for a closer look. Ellie zoomed in on her face, revealing her determined expression as she marched through the forest. Light complimented Ellie's flawless execution of the plan to lure Sasha in and thanked her for making it possible. As he watched, he noticed his hand beginning to tremble, not from fear, but from overwhelming anticipation. The thought of witnessing Sasha's face twist in terror and regret when he finally unleashed his revenge filled him with intense excitement. All he could do now was hope that she would arrive soon.
Meanwhile, in the forest, Sharp Hat questioned whether Sasha truly knew where she was going. She calmly explained that she had marked the path during her previous visit, pointing out faint scratches she had left on the trees. Moments later, she stumbled on the uneven trail, but Mikhail caught her before she could fall. Observing the exchange, Sharp Hat muttered sarcastically about how they still managed to flirt even in such a dangerous environment. At the top of the tower, Aoyuki sensed the White Knights approaching at great speed. Not long afterward, the unit arrived at the gates, which slowly creaked open in response to their presence. From deep within the structure, two massive orthos beasts emerged and marched into the forest. They were soon followed by wave after wave of monsters pouring out behind them. Sharp Hat instinctively reached for his weapon, prepared to strike, but Hardy stopped him. He reminded the squad that their true objective was the dragon and informed them that the hired adventurer team would soon create a diversion. Moments later, flares ignited throughout the forest, drawing the monsters away from the tower's entrance. Once the path was clear, Hardy turned to Sasha and asked whether those were the only orthos stationed inside. When she confirmed this with a nod, he gave the order to advance, declaring the tower interior secure apart from the dragon itself. Nevertheless, he cautioned everyone to remain alert, as hidden dangers might still await them within. To ensure complete silence during their infiltration, Hardy cast a powerful magic barrier that erased all sound around the squad. The sudden, oppressive quiet sent a chill down Sasha's spine, prompting her to quietly acknowledge that Hardy's reputation for ruthless efficiency was well deserved. As the White Knights charged into the tower,
Ellie turned toward Light with a smirk and told him to prepare himself, remarking that the appetizer was about to be served before the true feast began. Inside the dark structure, the knights suddenly triggered a hidden teleportation circle beneath their feet. In an instant, they were scattered across different sections of the tower's labyrinth interior. Watching the chaos unfold, Light leaned forward with a cold smile, eager to see each of them struggle helplessly toward the trap he had prepared. Mikhail and Sasha found themselves transported to a deeper basement level. Almost immediately, Mikhail realized that the entire situation had been a meticulously planned ambush from the very beginning. Sasha quickly asked who could have orchestrated such a scheme, but Mikhail remained silent, offering her no answer. Mikhail simply told Sasha that the truth awaited them at the top of the stairs, and that everything would become clear once they reached it. Elsewhere, Light and Ellie silently observed the unfolding events through a crystal orb. As Mikhail and Sasha began their ascent, Light struggled to contain his excitement, eager to witness the moment Sasha would step through the final door and confront the true mastermind behind the elaborate scheme. At the same time, the elven twins, Nia and Kia, found themselves stranded on a different floor, surrounded by darkness as they tried to make sense of what had just happened. They considered regrouping with the others, but before they could move, voices echoed from behind them. The voices belonged to Mera and Ice Heat, who were casually discussing how to deal with what they dismissively referred to as the pathetic elves. Mera shrugged and remarked that Ice Heat could relax while she handled both opponents herself. Ice Heat responded with a smirk, teasing that Mera was being greedy and suggesting they each take one. The twins were stunned, as no one had ever spoken down to them in such a manner before. Yet Mera and Ice Heat paid them no real attention, continuing their conversation as though the elves were not even present. Ice Heat added a warning that they should not become overconfident, since even a cornered rat might bite. Mera scoffed in response, calling the twins nothing more than buzzing insects unworthy of serious effort. She questioned whether Ice Heat truly believed these so-called warriors posed any threat. Ice Heat laughed and agreed that the twins were far beneath their level, though she advised against toying with their prey for too long.
That remark proved to be the breaking point. Enraged, the twins charged forward without hesitation, shouting that they were the dominant fighters of the continent and would never accept being labeled second-rate. However, Mera and Ice Heat effortlessly sidestepped their aerial assault as if it were child's play. Undeterred, the twins ricocheted off nearby pillars at lightning speed and launched a synchronized strike from behind, only to be evaded once again with the same ease. The girls landed lightly, barely affected. Mera laughed, mocking the twins for resembling hyperactive flying squirrels rather than desperate predators. Pushed beyond their limits, the twins vowed to confront their smug opponents head-on. Meanwhile, Sharp Hat found himself stranded in darkness on another floor entirely. He sighed heavily, berating himself for failing to notice the teleportation trap sooner, and already dreading Hardy's inevitable reprimand. Unlike the others, however, he quickly sensed he was not alone. Calling into the shadows, he demanded that whoever was hiding reveal themselves and explain the situation. Suzu stepped forward. At the mere sight of her, Sharp Hat became instantly infatuated, showering her with exaggerated compliments. Suzu visibly recoiled from his unsettling behavior, yet he ignored her discomfort and dramatically asked for her name, claiming he was ready to pledge himself as her loyal knight. Before she could respond, her sentient mustit, Locke, snapped at him to be quiet and keep his inappropriate thoughts to himself. Locke added that Suzu did not speak much, a revelation that only seemed to intrigue Sharp Hat further. Realizing the weapon itself was alive, Sharp Hat's interest shifted. Locke warned him not to bother remembering its name, since he would not live long enough to need it. Sharp Hat groaned, lamenting that he had fallen for such a basic trap, only to end up fighting someone he found attractive for no good reason.
Still unwilling to abandon his antics, he suggested they postpone the fight to get acquainted. Locke immediately rejected the idea, stating bluntly that Suzu was not interested and that he was not her type. Unashamed, Sharp Hat pressed on, asking what her type was so he could work toward becoming it. Suzu calmly told Locke that she preferred short men with dark hair and thinning hairlines. Locke paused, instantly understanding the implication, and remarked that she would have to wait her turn since Light already had a full entourage. Irritated, Suzu began striking the moustique against a nearby pillar while it protested loudly. Sharp Hat finally lost patience and dropped his flirtatious facade, declaring that he would gladly claim her as his personal plaything. In the next instant, he raised his arm and fired an invisible bolt from a concealed crossbow. To his shock, Suzu detected the attack immediately and dodged with precision before returning fire. He deflected her bullet with ease, impressed by her ability to counter so swiftly. Even Locke admitted that very few fighters could block one of her shots. Grinning, Sharp Hat loaded another bolt and remarked that the battle was already proving far more entertaining than he had anticipated. Elsewhere, the twins continued darting between pillars, fully aware that the terrain favored their mobility. While maintaining their speed, they unleashed another barrage of wind-cutting techniques. Mara and Ice Heat evaded the attacks without difficulty, though they began to focus more seriously, realizing they could not afford to underestimate their opponents indefinitely. The twins, however, persisted with a relentless repetition of the same technique. Ice Heat muttered that they could not possibly sustain such intensity forever. The twins countered smugly that they could continue for hours without tiring. Soon after, they shifted tactics, repositioning themselves near a pillar before unleashing an advanced variation of their attack that filled the area with thousands of razor-sharp blades. The onslaught was far more difficult to avoid. While Mara and Ice Heat concentrated on slipping through the narrow gaps, Kia suddenly hurled a dagger that pierced deep into Mara's abdomen, and Nia followed up by slicing off her arm.
Landing together, the twins laughed like maniacs, convinced victory was within reach. To their astonishment, neither Mara nor Ice Heat showed any sign of pain. Mara casually asked Ice Heat whether she had assessed their power level yet. Ice Heat replied in a bored tone that the twins were even weaker than expected. Enraged, the elves shouted that they were clearly winning, until their voices faltered as May calmly retrieved her severed arm and began chewing on it as though it were food. Horrified, the twins froze. Mara escalated the nightmare further by tearing off her own head and tossing it around playfully. The twins screamed in disbelief, demanding to know what kind of monster she was. Mara finally revealed that both she and Ice Heat were ultra-rare level 7,777 cards. The revelation left the twins stunned and unwilling to believe such beings could exist. Nevertheless, they charged again in desperation. This time, Mara and Ice Heat did not even attempt to dodge. They allowed the attacks to strike them directly, remarking that defending was not worth the effort. True fear finally set in, and the twins turned to flee. Mara burst into manic laughter, while Ice Heat calmly began charging a massive blast of heat. Mara shielded herself in preparation for the finishing strike. Meanwhile, on the lower floor, Sharp Hat intensified his assault on Suzu, firing bolt after bolt and altering their trajectories mid-flight while unleashing entire barrages in hopes of landing a hit. Suzu avoided every shot without suffering so much as a scratch, which only fueled his excitement. He taunted her, suggesting she abandon Light and choose him instead. That remark proved to be the final provocation. Suzu's eyes began to glow as fury surged through her, her body radiating intense killing intent. Fully focused, she prepared to obliterate him. Elsewhere, the fleeing twins reached a dead end and began searching along the perimeter for an escape route. Suddenly, they felt the ground growing unbearably hot. A massive wave of heat crashed toward them as Ice Heat unleashed her scorching attack.
Realizing they were about to be incinerated, the twins frantically chanted spells and erected a towering wall of ice. To their shock, it melted almost instantly, forcing them to summon another. They continued forming barrier after barrier, but their mana reserves were quickly exhausted. Soon, even their armor began to warp and melt under the relentless heat. Moments later, the raging flames completely engulfed the twins, erasing them from sight. Only then did ice heat finally cease her attack. She briefly worried that she might have accidentally killed them, despite Light's clear order to capture the elves alive. Mara reassured her that Ellie had placed powerful protective enchantments on their targets, ensuring that they would survive. Without that magic, she explained, the twins would have been reduced to ashes. When the fire subsided, the elves lay scorched and broken on the ground, desperately pleading for mercy. Mara coldly informed them that they would receive the same mercy they had once shown to humans. She then restrained and silenced them with her tentacles, knowing that Light intended to extract every piece of information from them before subjecting them to unimaginable torment. Elsewhere, Sharp Hat finally grasped the severity of his situation when Suzu fired several rounds into the air before redirecting them all toward him at once. He fled in panic, desperately attempting to evade the barrage, but quickly realized he was hopelessly outmatched. He tried to block his bolts with his own bolts, yet it proved futile as the storm of projectiles tore through his body, leaving him bleeding and barely conscious on the ground. In a weak voice, he begged for mercy. Standing over him, Suzu was still consumed by fury. She began stomping on his face, screaming for him to die, and would have finished him off if Locke had not intervened. The sentient weapon reminded her that Light wanted to observe their full potential before capturing them. The revelation snapped Suzu back to her senses, and her rage immediately gave way to panic. She dropped to her knees, frantically trying to treat Sharp Hat's wounds so he could continue fighting. However, Locke gently told her it was already too late. He was far too injured to stand, let alone battle. Suzu burst into tears, overwhelmed with guilt, while Locke quietly reassured her that Light would not be angered by an honest mistake.
Meanwhile, on another floor, Jack encountered Muste standing alone with his axe. Jack casually remarked that they were apparently meant to fight, though he suggested Muste simply surrender since he had no desire to bully the weak. Muste took offense but maintained his composure, declaring that Jack should consider it an honor to die at the hands of an elf ranked above level 1500. Jack dismissed the boast and calmly revealed that he himself was an ultra-rare card at level 7777. Muste scoffed, accusing him of making an absurd bluff and urging him to at least invent something believable. Jack merely grinned and challenged him to verify the claim using his appraisal skill. When he noticed Muste's hesitation, he mockingly asked whether the elf even possessed such an ability. Provoked, Muste charged forward in anger, swinging his axe in hopes of ending the fight swiftly. Jack effortlessly knocked the weapon aside. Convinced it had been a fluke, Muste launched a relentless series of strikes, all of which Jack blocked without difficulty. What unsettled Muste most was that those same attacks were reputedly powerful enough to shake even Captain Hardy. With nothing more than a flick of his fingers, Jack blasted Muste into a wall. Crawling out of the crater in disbelief, Muste refused to accept that a human could overpower him. He began ranting that humans were inferior beings who deserved worse than death. In desperation, he slammed his axe into the ground, activating its cursed magic. Jack immediately noticed that the weapon was draining Muste's soul and life force to enhance his strength, but Muste showed no concern. He shouted at the weapon to take whatever it wanted as long as it granted him the power to crush his opponent. Driven by the last of his strength, Muste charged again. Jack calmly activated his iron armor skill, blocking the strike with his forearm as a dense metallic shell enveloped his entire body. With a single punch, he sent Muste crashing back into the wall, leaving him bloodied and unconscious. Jack approached, lifted him up,
and briefly wondered whether he had gone too far. Still, Ellie's protective magic ensured that the elf was alive. On the upper floor, the final white knight still standing was Captain Hardy. He now found himself face to face with Nazuna, whose wild grin revealed her excitement as she drew her blade, eager for battle. At first, Hardy dismissed her as a mere child pretending to be a warrior. Nazuna, however, stood her ground and demanded that he take her seriously. Amused, Hardy asked whether she truly believed she had been sent to defeat him. She nodded without hesitation, explaining that her master had ordered her to eliminate him. Taking a closer look, Hardy's expression hardened as he sensed the immense pressure radiating from her small frame. Despite her innocent appearance, she clearly possessed tremendous power. He also realized that if her master was even stronger, then the force behind her might pose a genuine threat. Nevertheless, he underestimated just how outmatched he truly was. Drawing his blade, he prepared for combat, while Nazuna readied herself without a trace of fear. He soon noticed the faint shimmer of enchantments pulsing through her armor. Before he could fully analyze them, Nazuna grew impatient and attacked, swinging her sword and releasing a sharp gust of wind. In an instant, the attack sliced through both the wall and Hardy's arm, sending him crashing to the ground. Confused by how quickly the fight had ended, Nazuna cautiously approached and prodded him with the tip of her sword. When he failed to respond, anxiety flickered across her face. At that moment, Ellie contacted her and began scolding her harshly for damaging the tower. Nazuna attempted to feign innocence, but Ellie reminded her that the entire structure had been built and reinforced with her own mana, precisely to prevent such destruction. Nazuna muttered an apology, yet Ellie warned that unless she learned to control her strength, she would never be able to carry out Light's orders effectively. Feeling guilty, Nazuna promised to restrain herself. Behind her, Hardy secretly used hidden healing magic to restore himself. Nazuna stared in confusion when she realized he was still alive. Then Ellie explained that she had been sustaining him remotely with her own magic. Now fully recovered, Hardy arose once more. Nazuna prepared for another round, this time vowing to keep her power in check.
Recognizing her threat at last, Hardy immediately unleashed his true strength. He cast a silent field that disrupted Nazuna's senses and explained that the spell gradually drained her energy while channeling it into him. He then shaped the stolen mana into an invisible, soundless blade whose constantly shifting size made it nearly impossible to predict. In response, Nazuna sheathed her sword and assumed a focused stance. Hardy narrowed his eyes, suspecting she intended to evade his unpredictable strikes with precise movements. Noticing her brief hesitation, he believed she would eventually make a mistake if she rushed forward. However, in the next instant, she appeared directly in front of him and slammed him into the tower wall. This time, instead of shattering, the reinforced structure merely cracked. Proud of her self-control, Nazuna raised her hands in triumph. Ellie's voice immediately cut in again, complaining that she would have to expend even more mana to repair the damage. Nazuna snapped back irritably, accusing Ellie of being overly annoying. Ellie froze in disbelief, wondering where Nazuna had learned to speak so bluntly. Nazuna casually explained that the palace maids often complained about her behind her back. Light intervened at that point, gently telling Ellie not to be too harsh since Nazuna had successfully completed her mission. Reluctantly, Ellie relented and instructed Nazuna to bring Hardy back. Turning to Light, she apologized for losing her temper, admitting she had only wanted to instill discipline in Nazuna for his sake. Light then asked whether she was all right after expending so much mana to maintain and repair the tower. Ellie insisted she was fine, smiling as she brushed off his concern and admitting that only her legs had begun trembling from the strain. Light remained unconvinced. At that moment, Aoyuki reminded them that Sasha and Mikhail were about to arrive. Light straightened himself,
ordered everyone to focus, and slipped on his dark mask, fully prepared to confront Sasha and finally settle their long-standing score. Outside the throne room, Mikhail leaned toward Sasha and promised to protect her no matter what happened. His reassurance calmed her enough to reach for the door, which suddenly creaked open on its own. Inside, Light greeted them calmly. As they stepped forward and approached him, Sasha's expression gradually changed. She realized that the masked man before her was the same individual who had once revealed his burned face to her. Light addressed her in a casual tone, prompting Mikhail to glance between them and ask whether they had met before. Sasha quickly dismissed the question, claiming she had only seen him once. Then she fixed a cold glare on Light and accused him of behaving far too familiarly. Sasha angrily told him to be quiet and stop pretending that they were old friends. Light responded by calmly recalling every act of kindness she had once shown him. Then, without warning, he removed his mask. Sasha froze as her mind went blank, staring at his face in disbelief when she realized that the scars she remembered were completely gone. Stammering, she asked what had happened to them. Light revealed that they had never been real, explaining that they had merely been an illusion. He added that he had even halted the aging of his own body so he would never forget the pain of her betrayal. While Sasha struggled to process his words, Mikhail turned to her in confusion and asked whether Light was truly the same Maestro their team had supposedly killed 3 years earlier. Light cut in before she could respond, explaining that after the ambush, he had been thrown into the lowest floor of the abyss by a teleportation trap. From there, he had survived with the help of his maid's power and eventually climbed back up, carefully planning every step of his revenge.
After revealing his past, Light finally faced Sasha directly and stated that the entire tower had been built for a single purpose: his perfect revenge. He calmly asked how she felt about that revelation, but Sasha remained silent. Her fiancé, however, suddenly burst into manic laughter. Grinning, he declared that this was their golden opportunity to claim the reward for clearing the tower and capturing Light. Sasha quickly pointed out that if Light returned to the capital alive, it would expose her failure to kill him years ago. Mikhail dismissed her concern, suggesting that their superiors would likely forgive her mistake if she handed him over now. His confidence seemed to reignite her resolve. Turning toward Light with a smug smile, Sasha mocked him for still clinging to thoughts of revenge and prepared to fight. Light calmly gripped his staff and instructed his maids not to interfere, explaining that this confrontation was personal. As he stepped forward to face her, he congratulated her on her engagement and promised to present his revenge as a wedding gift. She scoffed and laughed at him, convinced that no human could rival an elf's strength. Boasting that she had recently reached level 500, she expected him to be intimidated. Light, however, showed no visible reaction. Misinterpreting his indifference, Sasha proudly produced a rare item gifted by her father. Light's curiosity was piqued when he saw the ocarina. The moment she played it, 3 enormous angels materialized before him. Certain of her victory, Sasha ordered the attacker-type angel to strike. The creature lunged forward and smashed the ground, forcing Light to leap back in surprise when the blow cracked the reinforced tower floor. He retaliated with his staff, but a second angel blocked the attack using a radiant holy barrier. Scowling, Light intensified his magic and shattered the shield through sheer force. Even so, the blast only destroyed the angel's arms rather than eliminating it. A third angel immediately stepped forward and healed its companions with divine magic. Observing their coordinated movements, Light chuckled as he recognized the formation, a balanced trio consisting of striker, defender, and healer. Across the chamber, Sasha stared in disbelief at the sight of a mere level 15 human holding his ground against her family's sacred phantasma-class summons. Light then smirked and calmly revealed that his true level was 9,999. Genuine fear flickered across Sasha's face. Mikhail quickly told her to relax, insisting that such a level was impossible since no one in recorded history had ever reached it. Reassured, she ordered her angels to attack again. Light instantly annihilated them with a crushing dust press spell, followed by a shadow dance and fire squall combination that incinerated their bodies to prevent regeneration. As a final measure, he unleashed a barrage of ice arrows to obliterate the remnants. Yet Sasha simply smiled and played the ocarina once more, restoring the angels as though nothing had happened. She smugly remarked that she could revive them endlessly without even drawing on her own mana. Realizing the instrument was far more troublesome than he had anticipated, Light vanished from sight and reappeared directly in front of her, thrusting his staff toward the ocarina to destroy it. Mikhail intervened at the last second, blocking the strike with his shield and warning Light to step back. Light acknowledged the impressive defense, but Mikhail corrected him, stating that he had not merely blocked the attack. As he spoke, the shield pulsed and unleashed a surge of force that sent Light flying across the battlefield. Stunned, Light demanded an explanation. Mikhail calmly revealed that the shield was a phantasma-grade relic, capable of absorbing an opponent's power and reflecting it back with even greater force. He then slammed it into the ground, breaking the spell that had restrained the angels, and added that the artifact also enhanced the abilities of both its wielder and nearby allies. Sasha laughed mockingly, convinced that Light never had any chance of winning. While Mikhail believed the battle was already decided, Sasha stepped forward with a triumphant grin and asked Light how it felt to be completely cornered.
Her taunt finally triggered an unexpected reaction. Light began laughing uncontrollably. Both Mikhail and Sasha paused, suspecting that the pressure had driven him mad. Straightening himself, Light told her she was gravely mistaken if she believed she had ever frightened him. With blazing eyes and a feral smile, he declared that he would now show her the meaning of true despair. Ellie and Aoyuki panicked and tried to stop him, but it was too late. Light released the seal on his soul that had been suppressing his true form. Pitch-black chains began swirling around him, radiating an overwhelming and terrifying energy. Alarmed, Mikhail shouted for Sasha to retreat. At that moment, Light called out a command, Code 9999, which summoned a massive weapon rack while shattering every chain restraining him. His old staff transformed into a newly forged X-class weapon known as Gungnir. The instant the weapon settled into his hand, Ellie and Aoyuki froze in horror. The suffocating dark pressure subsided as Light stepped forward with chilling calm, telling Sasha that she would now understand what real fear felt like. For the first time, both she and Mikhail began to panic as he advanced toward them. Mikhail urgently ordered her to summon the angels again, and she complied without hesitation. The attacker-type angel rushed forward and struck with its weapon, but Light casually snapped it in half. The terror on the angel's face was unmistakable. Next, the defender-type angel raised a divine shield, only for Light to shatter it effortlessly with a single swing of Gungnir. Witnessing the ease with which he dismantled them, Mikhail shouted for Sasha to keep summoning more to slow him down. Light merely laughed, clearly prepared to watch them struggle in vain. Suddenly, a sharp pain shot through his hand. Glancing down, he saw the weapon's dark aura burning his skin and consuming his flesh. He understood that its power was too great for a human body to withstand for long, yet he did not hesitate. If sacrificing his arm was the price of revenge, he was willing to pay it. In desperation, Sasha activated her ultimate ability, fusing all three angels into a single supreme archangel. She ordered it to cast a tactical class spell intended to erase Light completely. Raising its weapon high, the archangel summoned a radiant golden spear. Sasha proudly declared the technique to be her strongest skill, Holy Javelin. As the divine energy gathered, Mikhail smiled to himself, imagining that once he married Sasha, he would inherit the ocarina and all of its terrifying power.
The archangel hurled the golden spear with devastating force, and Sasha laughed confidently as it hurtled toward Light. When it struck, she smugly bid him farewell, only for the attack to vanish instantly. Light remained standing, completely unharmed, having neutralized the spell as though it were nothing. He mocked Sasha for believing she ever possessed the strength to harm him. Panicking, she ordered the archangel to strike again, but every blow shattered on contact as Light advanced like an unstoppable force. He calmly asked whether she had already run out of options. In desperation, Sasha unleashed a rapid volley of javelins, hoping sheer quantity would succeed where power had failed. Light destroyed each one effortlessly, never losing the grin on his face as he continued walking toward her like a sentence of death. Finally, losing control, Sasha screamed at him to stay away. She unleashed every remaining fragment of her magic, yet nothing reached him, and nothing slowed his advance. Light only laughed, urging her to try harder, and warning that if this was the best she could do, she would die there. Moments later, he unleashed an enormous phantom from his weapon, sending a fresh wave of dread through the already terrified elves. Sasha frantically attempted to recall her archangel, but the phantom sliced through it as though it were weightless. Mikhail shouted at her to summon it again, yet even after she desperately played the ocarina, no response came.
Panic overtook Sasha as she stared at her treasured relic. Before her eyes, the ocarina dimmed, turned an ominous shade of black, and crumbled into dust in her hands. Light smirked and mocked them for relying on such a worthless artifact. Mikhail refused to accept what he had just witnessed, insisting that no weapon could possibly destroy a Phantasma-class treasure so effortlessly. Light then revealed the truth. Gungnir was not an ordinary weapon, but a Genesis-class relic, something far beyond anything they could comprehend. Mikhail scoffed in disbelief, unable to imagine that someone like Light could wield an artifact of such legendary status. Nervous, Sasha hid behind him and tried to dismiss the situation, claiming that Light had simply been lucky and that the ocarina must have been under too much strain. Mikhail supported her bravado, confidently declaring that he would block whatever came next with his shield. However, when Light struck again, the attack shattered the shield instantly and sent both elves crashing to the floor. Struggling to stand, Mikhail's aching body finally forced him to confront a terrifying possibility, that Light might be a legendary Maestro. Light merely smirked and admitted he did not even know what a Maestro was, despite hearing the title mentioned by the 9 races. Realizing how hopelessly outmatched he was, Mikhail decided to retreat. He framed the decision as an act of generosity, claiming he would return to report the incident to his kingdom. Producing a high-tiered teleportation item known as the Skyrunner Wing, he attempted to escape the tower, but the feather failed to respond. Light calmly explained that his tower nullified all teleportation magic. Mikhail refused to believe such a barrier could exist. Light then called Ellie forward, and she clarified that while teleportation blockers were impossible for most, she had constructed one herself after studying the Abyss's dungeon core. The revelation left Mikhail stunned, unable to process that someone had successfully researched something so dangerous. With escape no longer an option, Light casually asked whether the elves intended to keep running anyway. Mikhail refused to surrender, convinced that the remaining white knights would soon arrive. He boasted that once their captain, whose level exceeded 3,000, appeared, Light would be annihilated. Laughing arrogantly, he continued taunting them, certain that rescue was inevitable. Light decided to shatter that illusion. He summoned his warriors, who entered dragging the battered, unconscious bodies of the other white knights. One by one, his servants carried the defeated elves into the chamber, leaving Mikhail and Sasha speechless. Jack then stepped into the room and immediately stiffened at the sight of the sinister weapon in Light's hand. The maids also appeared uneasy, but Light reassured them that everything was under control. He approached Mikhail and mockingly asked what had become of his earlier arrogance.
Mikhail's confidence collapsed instantly. Dropping to his knees, he prostrated himself and began offering his political expertise in exchange for his life, claiming he could help Light conquer the entire elven queendom. Sasha was stunned by the sudden betrayal. Mikhail continued pitching schemes for power, but Light cut him off coldly, stating that he had no interest in their insignificant kingdom. He made it clear that revenge, not conquest, was his only objective. Desperate, Mikhail shifted tactics again and begged for mercy. He insisted he had played no part in the Nine Races mission to kill Light 3 years earlier, and instead blamed everything on Sasha. She was devastated to see her fiancé discard her without hesitation. Mikhail behaved as though he had never cared for her, dismissing her as someone who had merely clung to him for status. Heartbroken, Sasha reminded him of all the times he had professed his love, but he brushed her off, revealing that it had all been a lie. Without shame, he then offered to kill Sasha himself if it would secure his survival. Light ignored the proposal and summoned Ellie instead. As Ellie approached the elves, rage burned in her eyes. She calmly explained how long she had dreamed of making them suffer for their sins, and promised them a slow, agonizing death. Mikhail immediately began whining for mercy, switching to flattery, and praising Light as though he were a divine savior.
Ellie smirked, seeing through his pathetic performance. When he realized no one was convinced, Mikhail attempted to flee. Ellie instantly cast a strategic-class spell called Dorn Feslin, summoning vicious thorned vines that wrapped around his body and slammed him to the ground. She explained the spell's lethality, and Mikhail's eyes widened in horror when he realized she had cast it without uttering a single incantation. With a dark grin, Ellie tightened the vines until he screamed in agony. She then dragged him closer, pressed her hand against his forehead, and began forcibly scanning his memories. Mikhail begged her to stop, but she continued extracting every piece of information while effectively destroying his mind. Witnessing his torment, Sasha began trembling with fear. Light turned toward her and coldly reminded her that she would be next. Shaking, she glanced once more at her fallen comrades before meeting his gaze. She attempted to soften him by reminiscing about their past together, portraying herself as his protector who had shielded him from the world's cruelty. She tried to justify her betrayal by claiming she had only wanted to spare him from Garu's abuse. Light remained unmoved. He calmly recalled the smug tone she had used and how much pleasure she had taken in humiliating a powerless human. When her false sincerity was exposed, Sasha grasped for another excuse, blaming everything on Drago and insisting she had merely followed orders. She argued that the suffering he endured in the abyss was not truly her fault. Growing more desperate, she reminded him that he had once harbored feelings for her and even offered to become his intimate partner if he spared her life. At that moment, Aoyuki stormed in, furious that Sasha would attempt to seduce her master. With venom in her voice, she threatened to feed Sasha to her monsters repeatedly for daring to disrespect Light. Before she could act, Light calmly ordered her to stand down. After taking a steadying breath, Aoyuki obeyed. Light then fixed his gaze on Sasha and declared that no matter what lies she told, his objective remained unchanged. He would uncover the truth behind their world and unlock the full extent of his power. Until then, he intended for her to rot in the abyss, chained to Garu and condemned to share his miserable fate. As he turned to leave, Sasha desperately called out to him one last time. In response, he fired an arrow into her leg, forcing her to experience the same pain she had once inflicted on him. Without another word, he ordered Mira to finish her. Mira's beasts eagerly closed in and began devouring Sasha. Choking back her panic, Sasha cried that all she had ever wanted was happiness. Light showed no reaction, coldly questioning how someone could pursue happiness by torturing and humiliating others. Her fate was sealed as Mira tore her apart without mercy.
Afterwards, Light suddenly staggered, drained by the cursed weapon's immense power. His body began to break down under the strain. Before the damage became fatal, he reactivated his soul seal, barely managing to suppress the raging energy. Sometime later, his maids gently carried him back to the abyss so he could recover. Outside his chamber, Nazuna asked Ellie whether Light would survive. Ellie hesitated, admitting she was uncertain. This prompted Nazuna to wonder how their master had been injured so severely. Ellie explained that despite grinding his gacha relentlessly for 3 years within the abyss's dense mana, Light had only obtained a single ultra-rare weapon, the Genesis-class Gungnir. She and Mei had tried countless methods to unlock its true potential, but it remained dangerously unstable even for them. That was why Light had required all 4 of his level 9999 maids to seal its power. Inside the tower, he had undone just one of those seals, and even that partial release had nearly destroyed his arm, demonstrating the weapon's overwhelming pressure. Later, in his room, Light slowly opened his eyes to find Mei beside him. She sighed a relief, grateful that he was still alive. As he sat up, he recalled losing consciousness in the tower and attempted to leave the bed to resume his work. Mei quickly stopped him, gently urging him to rest a little longer.
She began recalling the first moment they had met, remembering the tears she had seen in his eyes. She told him that ever since that day, she had done everything in her power to help him achieve his dreams. However, she now insisted that those dreams were not worth dying for, especially when an entire kingdom believed in him and needed him to stay alive. Meanwhile, deep within the Elven nation, the royal chancellor reported that the entire squad of white knights had gone silent. One of the elf nobles suggested the possibility that they had been wiped out, which infuriated the elf queen. She flatly refused to believe that anyone could defeat Hardy. The noble reminded her, however, that it had already been 2 full days without any word from him. At that moment, a scout burst into the council chamber, gasping for breath. He shouted that an army of dragons had gathered just outside the kingdom's walls. Everyone rushed to the windows, only to witness a terrifying swarm of dragons circling the skies above their realm. The nobles angrily demanded an explanation from the guards, questioning how such a threat had slipped past their defenses. Before anyone could respond, Ellie's voice suddenly echoed in their minds. Using telepathy, she introduced herself as the Wicked Witch of the Towering Monolith. She announced that she had received the intruders who had dared to step into her domain, and warned that unless their queen revealed herself immediately, she would reduce the entire kingdom to ashes. To prove her point, she ordered her dragons to unleash a barrage of fireballs outside the city. The nearby forest was quickly engulfed in flames, transforming into a hellish inferno, and leaving the royal court frozen in fear. Ellie then gave them 3 minutes to bring forth their ruler. Shortly afterward, she descended from the sky and landed in the center of the Elven Palace garden, where she was instantly surrounded by the royal guards. Before a battle could erupt, the Elf Queen herself appeared and formally introduced herself as Lith. She coldly informed Ellie that she would not tolerate such insolence and ordered her to leave the Elven nation at once. Ellie calmly countered by reminding the queen that it had been her own white knights who had shown disrespect first by storming into her tower uninvited. The queen stiffened and demanded to know what had become of them. Ignoring the question, Ellie instead asked why the queen had sent them in the first place, accusing her of attempting to plunder her sacred relics. The queen exploded with fury, shouting that her noble race would never stoop to such disgraceful acts. Ellie remained unconvinced and stepped forward without hesitation. Alarmed, the royal guards moved to intercept her, but she immediately unleashed a swarm of vampiric trees that pierced through their bodies and drained them of every drop of life force. As the queen watched in horror, Ellie smugly explained the devastating power of the spell she had just cast. Panicking, the queen attempted to flee, but Ellie lashed out with her vines and dragged her back. With the brambles tightly coiled around her, Ellie pressed a hand against the queen's head and began a brutal scan of her memories to determine whether she was telling the truth. After digging deep into her mind, Ellie confirmed that the queen had indeed been unaware of the knight's actions. However, her expression darkened as she uncovered layers of deeply rooted racist ideology buried within the queen's thoughts. Furious, Ellie demanded the immediate release of every enslaved human still held within the queendom. Then she issued a chilling decree. The elves were never to enslave another soul again, or they would face total annihilation. With that, she left the queen shattered and stunned. At the same time, back in the Abyss, May updated Light on their recent successes in liberating humans from surrounding nations. She added that the Mohawk crew was doing its best, but it was struggling to support the sudden influx of rescued people. Light rose from his seat, ready to help, but May gently urged him to take things easy. He brushed aside her concern, assuring her that he was more than capable. Moments later, he appeared in the main hall and greeted the other 3 maids who were waiting for him. Afterward, he made his way to the human settlement near the base of the tower, where the Mohawk gang was working tirelessly to help everyone get settled. As he watched the peaceful scene unfold, his maids explained how they had been laboring non-stop to transform the area into a thriving, self-reliant city. Eventually, Light admitted that after learning the truth about their world, he had been uncertain about what path he should take next. Now, however, he felt certain that he wanted to protect this world, no matter how twisted it might seem, because kindness and beauty still existed within it. He acknowledged that eliminating prejudice and hatred would not be easy, and quietly wondered whether his vision was too ambitious. His maids quickly reassured him that they would stand by his side through everything. Surrounded by people he could truly trust, Light finally felt ready to face whatever challenges lay ahead.